Hey everybody, welcome to Mr. Clares' Nightmare, which is getting things ready for e-learning days. So uh, I guess from the standpoint that I won't have to get students together, take class time out and shop time out to teach you a few basics things. So I guess, from that standpoint, e-learning's not that bad. So I'll be able to get a couple basic things out of the way. And the one thing I want to talk today about is just gluing. Uh, Anytime that you glue up a project, a wood project especially, you want to make sure that your parts are ready to go. They are fitted together. So I always tell students, try things together dry. Make sure that they fit together without glue, because once you put glue to them, you're kind of committed to putting this thing together, whether or not it fits. So you want to make sure that you really try everything together. Make sure those parts fit together before you actually put the glue to them. So I'm just going to glue up these three blocks. This is part of our iPhone speaker box for those of you that are working on this, but the principles are the same. And what we're going to use today is we're just going to use good old-fashioned wood glue. Okay, I buy it in the gallon bottles, and then I transfer it to the smaller bottles that we can use around the shop. And you can do the same at home. This stuff will keep in a bottle like this, even with an open top. It will keep for a year or two better, without losing any of its strength or without getting too sticky and solid. So we're going to use wood glue. I mean, there are other products out there. Gorilla Glue, the original Gorilla Glue, is a great product, but it is a water-activated glue. So with a water-activated glue, what you have to do is you have to either take a spray bottle, spray down your parts, get them a little bit damp, or you're going to have to, wipe them down with the damp rag. So whatever you want to do, but that's how the Gorilla Glue works. It's a water-activated glue, and it's an extremely strong glue. I like using it for certain applications, but for just regular woodworking, regular strength, I don't like to mess with it because it is in a couple extra steps, and it is a little more of a spendy product. I can get a gallon of this stuff for like $16, and a little bottle of wood of that Gorilla Glue is like $8 or $9. So I'm kind of cheap. So we're just going to talk a little bit about glues. So the way the glue operates is that it will get into the pores of the wood, and it will actually, the glue will stick to the glue, and it will also get into the pores of the wood, and it will stick to the pores of the wood. So when you glue those two pieces together, you get a nice tight fit, and you get something that's going to hold together. When you are done, if you've done this properly, the wood glue should be just as strong as any of your other joints. That when you try to break a joint apart, you should actually splinter some of the wood out if you glued everything up correctly. So we're just going to get right into it today. And the biggest problem I have with students is that they use either too much glue or not enough glue. So how much is too much? How much is not enough? So you want to make sure that when you're gluing, and I'm going to face glue these pieces together just like this, face to face. So I'm going to need quite a bit of glue over the entire face. And I want to make sure I get it all the way to the edges and to the corners and in the middle. I want to make sure that this thing is going to hold together when I'm done. So probably what you want to do is, and I'll move my camera here just to show you, but I'm just going to take my glue bottle and I'm just going to give myself a kind of a light stream along the edges and into the corners. Okay, and really that's probably all I need right there, and that might even be a little too much. But then I'm going to take one of my 10 glue spreaders, and I still have 10 after teaching shop for 37 years, but I still have 10 glue spreaders. And I'm just going to work this glue into the corners. Now, we have quite a bit of open clamp time. That's what they talk about with wood glue a lot, is just time that you can make these pieces, you can move them around a little bit before you're really committed. So I've got about 10 minutes of open clamp time here, which is plenty for what I'm going to do. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get a nice even film of glue across. You can spread glue with a brush if you choose, not a paintbrush, but they actually make what's called an acid brush. It's got a little metal handle, and it's got a short set of bristles that are only about a ½ inch long and about a ½ inch wide. And those are great, but if I've got 25 kids working in the shop and they each have to glue projects together, 3 or 4 projects together, I'm talking a couple hundred brushes I'm going to go through. But what I've done is I've taken a little bit of my excess glue off, just wiped it down onto my paper towel, and I have a nice even coat of glue there. You can kind of see it as the light hits it. You can kind of see the particle board underneath it. If it's a regular piece of wood, you should be able to see the wood grain underneath it. But if it's really thick and heavy, you're going to have a lot of ooze out. And we'll talk about ooze out in a little bit. So I'm just going to take one of my pieces. I'm just going to put it on top of the other. And what I'm going to do is I'm going, especially with a large surface like this, I'm going to move it around a little bit. I don't know if you can see the motion that I have on this board here. I'm just going to move that around because it's going to get the wood, glue into my top piece here as well. So I just want to make sure I get a good contact with that, and I can feel that it's getting a little bit sticky, but I can still move it pretty easily. So while that's setting up, I'm just going to flip that over. I'm going to do a real quick glue. I'm going to maybe learn from my first experiment and put a little bit less glue on there. We'll try that. Same thing, take one of my handy dandy glue spreaders. Don't leave home without them. And I'm just going to spread this glue all the way around into the corners again. Make sure that I have a nice even coat all the way to the edges and into the corners. And of course in the middle. Okay, so here I got a pretty good glue spread here. I don't have a lot of extra I'm going to have to wipe off. Maybe one finger's worth there that I got to spread off. And then I'm just going to take my other board and I'm just going to do the same thing I did on the bottom board. I'm just going to set it on top. I'm going to just kind of squish it around a little bit. And you notice that even if you notice, I can still move my bottom boards yet. So I still have that open clamp time that I was talking about. Okay, so I've got my boards. They're pretty well glued up. I think the glue spread is on there pretty good. So now what I want to do is clamp them. And this is the thing that I think kids have the hardest part or hardest thing with is how do I clamp this together? Well, I don't want to run my clamp, and I just got one of these hand screw clamps. I don't want to run it that way because it's not really clamping my three boards together. It's just clamping the sides of my boards together, and it's not going to do anything for me. So I want to turn this so I make sure that I'm clamping my boards together this way. Okay. So I'm just going to, as I clamp this down, you notice it's starting to shift a little bit. So I want to make sure that I put a little pressure with my clamps, and I'll move my other clamp in over here. And as I put some pressure on this, you'll notice that they do move just a little bit. So I don't want to clamp them like super solid just yet. I want to make sure that if my boards did move on me, I can still move them back into the correct position. So I'm checking for a nice even evenness at the top here. Everything is flush and even, and on my sides are flush and even. It's just a lot less additional cutting that I'm going to have to do later. And you can kind of see that as I'm tightening down on my clamps here, I'm getting a little bit of ooze out, which is good. This is actually, you can kind of see down here, I don't know if you can see that very well, that's kind of an ideal amount of ooze out. I got just a couple little droplets forming along this seam right here. You can kind of see them. I got a little more over here, but that's really not that bad. That's kind of what you're looking for. A little bit of ooze out means that you've gotten the clamps into the right positions and you've got the right amount of pressure. Now, you can over clamp lumber. I mean, if you sit there and you crank on some of these clamps where you can really get some torque on them, you can easily over crank things. So you don't want to sit there and crank until you squeeze all the glue out of there, because then your joint's going to come apart on you. Okay, so I've got this, and it's pretty nice. I'm going to leave it set someplace flat for a little bit. I don't want to set it up on the end. I don't want to set it off to the side just quite yet. I want to make sure that this set of boards that I worked on is going to stay in place. So I'm just going to move that around the corner of my table here. Just drop the clamp off the end of the table. And we're going to talk a little bit more about ooze out. So ooze out is going to be inevitable. If you did a good job of gluing and you got glue to the entire surfaces and the corners, you're going to get a little bit of ooze out. So this one's a little extreme, and I actually tried to make it a little extreme just to show a couple things. So this is a little too much ooze out, whereas you saw those droplets on that other one. That is perfect. So what do you do with ooze out? And there's a couple schools of thought about that. The one school of thought is, well, just wait until it's completely dry, take something like a sharp chisel or a putty knife or even a paint scraper and just scrape it off, and that glue will be hard it will just fly right off of there. The other school of thought is while it's still kind of rubbery, and you can kind of see that I can move this just a little bit with my finger, I can still squish it down a little bit where it's up a little higher here. So it's what we call rubbery. So what you can do then is you can take a sharp chisel, one of those razor knives, you know, those that you use for like scraping paint. I'm going to make sure I keep my hands behind my chisel front. And I'm just going to scrape that glue right off of there. And you can kind of see that it's rubbery. It still has a little bit of elasticity. It hasn't set up super hard yet. So I can scrape that down. Try not to gouge my wood, because if I do, I got a lot more sanding I have to do, and then I might have changed the shape of my project. But I'm just taking my chisel, and I'm, again, keeping my hand behind the front edge of that chisel. I'm just going to scrape as much of that glue out. I'm not trying to make a joint in here. I'm not trying to change the wood itself. I am just trying to get the glue off of there. Okay, so I'll go to the other side here, do the same thing, and I'm not using a lot of pressure, and I'm not taking off any of my wood. Okay, so that's what you can do with the glue, and if you didn't get it all out and it's hardened, what you can do is, like I say, you wait until that's good and hard, you know, the next day, and, you know, take either another chisel to it, or you can take just a paint scraper. Paint scrapers work great for getting glue off. So what do you do if you've gotten glue on some place that you don't want to? The best thing to do is to take a wet paper towel, especially with wood glue. Now the other products I was talking about, like the Gorilla Glue with the water activated, or in this case I've got a spray glue. This is a lot tougher to work with. This is going to have to come off with like a paint thinner or something like that. It's again why I don't like using spray glues into stuff, because it's just a little tough for students to work with. So what if I goofed and I've got this thing someplace that it's, you know, I've got glue where it's not supposed to be. Now, the bad thing about wood glue is it's going to seal up the pores. And by that, I mean, just like we talked about, it gets the pores to, the glue gets inside the pores, and the glue sticks to the glue, and the glue is stuck to the pores. The same thing happens when you have glue in an area you don't want. So I took a board here, just a little piece of oak here, and I put some glue in two spots. I got a smear of glue right here, and you can see that right here. And I've got one that's probably a little less noticeable right here. So it starts right here and it ends probably right about there. This one is really distinct. It starts here and ends here. So on this one, all I did is I took a dry paper towel and I just tried to get the glue off there as fast as I could. This one I took a wet paper towel and I really did put some elbow grease onto it. Once the board's dried, you know, from the water on the board, I took and stained it. So stain is something we haven't talked about yet in any depth, but what stain does is it changes the color of the wood from the original color here to a different color. Okay, but you can see how the wood glue here has sealed up the pores, and the stain did not take, and you can see a definite line right here that where I didn't get the glue cleaned out very well, and it sealed up the pores and it changed the color of the board. Here it's a little less noticeable. You notice a little bit here and right about here you can kind of see in between those 2 points where, you know, it's just a little bit different. You know, the grain doesn't pop as much as it does out here, and here you can see that it's a little bit sealed up. So the best thing to do with just wood glue is to, if you got it someplace you don't want to, get to it as soon as you can with a wet paper towel, a wet rag, really put some elbow grease on there and get that glue up before it seals up the pores. So now how long do you need to wait? With most of this glue, 30 minutes you can take the clamps off. So if you glue at the beginning of the class period, you could probably, by the end of the class period, you can take the clamps off. On block days, yeah, you could glue in the beginning of the class period, and by halfway through the class period, you can start working with those pieces of lumber. You want to make sure that they are set up. So give it a little bit of chance. You should give it at least 20 to maybe as much as 30 minutes before you start doing anything. If you're going to put a lot of pressure on it, I would wait pretty much overnight. You know, if I'm going to put some heavy stuff on there, or I'm going to really try to torque on that joint, I want to make sure I wait overnight so I don't break that apart. So with that kind of eats up our whole time here. This camera's got a 15-minute limit to it, and you've got a 15-minute attention span. So with that, if you have any questions, of course, we'll answer when we get back together, whenever that's going to be. So again, stay safe. hopefully you learned something from this, and we'll see you later.